Because this is the part people are missing. When Terrence "Punch" Henderson had to get on the phone with Lupe Fiasco after that latest Kendrick Lamar spiral, that was not some cute little rap Twitter cleanup. That was the moment the whole illusion cracked. On July 2, Punch publicly said he had a great conversation with Lupe, that it was all love and respect, and that they talked about everything from the Monster Freestyle and the 2010 live stream, all the way up to Lupe's recent podcast appearances. Read that again, not just the current noise, not just one clip. A 16-year trail of context, ego, fan translation, and internet distortion all got dragged into one call. And if you still think this is just Lupe hates Kendrick or Kendrick fans are too sensitive, you are already standing in the wrong room. Because this story is not really about who can rap better in a vacuum. It is about what happens when one rapper becomes the culture's final exam, another rapper becomes trapped in a never-ending lyricism debate, and the people monetizing the chaos keep acting like nuance is a crime. By the time we get to why Punch specifically referenced that 2010 live stream and why Lupe suddenly started sounding exhausted by his own comment section, you're going to see this whole thing very differently. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now, the surface level version is easy. Lupe Fiasco jumped into another public conversation where Kendrick Lamar's name came up, the internet clipped the harshest parts, Kendrick's fan base lit the sky up, and Punch did what Kendrick almost never has to do himself, step in from the perimeter and cool the temperature. But the stakes are bigger than two elite rappers disagree. Musically, you were talking about two artists whose names triggered completely different ideas of greatness. Kendrick is the modern institutional giant, the awards magnet, the chart bully, the cultural shorthand for important rap. Lupe is the technician's technician, the rapper other rappers study, the guy whose pen still gets treated like a graduate seminar. Culturally, that means any comparison between them instantly stops being analytical and turns tribal. Financially and reputationally, one of them is operating from a fortress, and the other keeps getting dragged into live stream court every time somebody wants views off the phrase better lyricist. So when Lupe says something provocative, it does not stay in the realm of bars for long. It becomes a referendum on taste, status, relevance, and whether hip-hop fans even know how to separate rapping from branding anymore. And that is why this matters right now. Not because Kendrick answered, he didn't. Not because Lupe dropped a diss, he didn't. It matters because the entire ecosystem around the conversation exposed itself at once, and it exposed the very thing a lot of people in this space do not want to admit. Kendrick has become the standard people fight over, even when Kendrick is nowhere in the room. And to make this even messier, this was not some out-of-nowhere flare-up with no backstory. Billboard reported on June 30 that Lupe had appeared on Quality Reacts and said, in disbelief, it was crazy people felt you could not even say you were a better rapper than Kendrick Lamar. He drew a sharp line between artistry and lyricism, saying Kendrick was a better artist, made better albums, had a better team, better production, better beat selection, but when it came down to these lyrics and going bar for bar, his answer was no. Then he doubled down on the broader point and said there were hundreds of rappers better than Kendrick by that lyrical standard. That is not a soft statement. That is gasoline with punctuation. And once a line like that hits the timeline, it stops belonging to the speaker. It gets adopted by every bad faith account, every fan channel, every debate tourist, every finally somebody said it contrarian who loves the smoke more than the substance. So the question was never just, did Lupe say it? The real question was, why does every Lupe-Kendrick conversation keep ending in the same chaotic place, no matter how much nuance Lupe tries to build around it? Start with the most obvious evidence. Piece 1 is Punch's own statement, because that is the closest thing we have to an official temperature check from Kendrick's side of the family. Punch did not say Lupe apologized. He did not say Kendrick pressed him. He said they talked through context, misunderstandings, misinterpretations, intentions, the old Monster Freestyle era, the 2010 live stream, and the recent podcast circuit, and that there was no smoke. That wording matters. Why? Because it tells you the issue was not one explosive insult, it was accumulation, a pileup of clips, old resentments, and fan translations so messy that a grown man had to come out and say, "Everybody relax." Does everybody understand how crazy that actually is? A 2026 rap debate had to reach back to 2010 just to explain itself. That is not normal discourse. That is backlog. That is digital baggage with ad revenue attached to it. Piece 2 is what Lupe actually said in that quality conversation, because this is where people start cheating. They act like Lupe said Kendrick was trash. He did not. Billboard's reporting shows Lupe explicitly separated artist from lyricist. He said Kendrick was better at albums, songs, team, production, better beat selection, the whole package. Then he drew the line at bar-for-bar lyricism. You can disagree with that. A lot of people do. But if you erase the structure of his argument and reduce it to Lupe is jealous, then you were either being lazy or you were farming engagement. And that matters, because once the clip economy flattens a layered take into one-line provocation, the only people who benefit are the content machines. Lupe becomes the heel, Kendrick fans become the army, and every channel with a thumbnail problem gets a new weekend upload. Meanwhile, the actual question, how are we defining lyricism in the first place, gets tossed out the window like it owed rent. Piece 3 is that this was not even the only public receipt complicating the Lupe the Hater narrative. Complex previously reported that Lupe posted a throwback video from a 2012 Chicago concert where he literally brought Kendrick on stage, gave him a Next Big Thing award, and called him the future. Then, when the hate accusations popped off again, Lupe sarcastically posted that clip to mock the idea that he had been a day one Kendrick hater. Now look, that doesn't automatically erase every wild thing he's said since, but it does break the simple-minded story people keep trying to sell. If a guy publicly celebrated Kendrick's rise, openly praises his impact, and still says, "I think I'm the better lyricist," then maybe the conversation is more complicated than internet prosecutors want it to be. Or maybe, and this is where things start getting uncomfortable, people only like complexity when it flatters the artist they already picked. Piece 4 is what happened after the backlash. Hot New Hip Hop reported that Lupe said you wouldn't be seeing him for a while after all this, that he wanted to step back from interviews and the online mess because the conversation had become outrageously toxic. That is important because it tells you even Lupe could feel the machine spinning out beneath him.
Is the part where I think we need to set the record straight on what is actually happening here. If a veteran MC keeps getting baited into explaining his standards of lyricism and every explanation gets chopped into another anti-Kendrick headline, at some point the story is not just Lupe said too much. The story is that the internet has learned how to turn discourse into punishment. And yes, Lupe absolutely helped feed it. I'm not letting Professor Pressure Run off the hook for that. If you keep walking into the same argument, eventually you own part of the smoke. But the smoke is still being manufactured by a machine that knows exactly what names to attach to exactly what thumbnails. And oh, do I have more for you, because the stands are really not going to like this next part. The visible facts are already messy enough, but once you get into the cultural receipts, the whole Lupe randomly attacked Kendrick storyline starts wobbling like a cheap folding chair. We have old tweets, old interviews, deleted posts, TDE reactions, and even actual collaborations that tell a very different story from the one the timeline keeps screaming. And yes, I'm going to get to that 2010 live stream where Punch said Lupe fell off and was doing too many fairy tale raps, because that is not a small detail. That is the kind of buried receipt that explains why old energy can suddenly feel brand new when it gets rediscovered in public. So if you came in here thinking this is a simple hero-villain fairy tale, ironic, I know, stay with me, because the culture layer is where the whole script flips. First cultural receipt. This conversation has been boiling for years, and the public record shows Lupe has repeated the same core opinion in different forms since at least 2018. Genius documented Lupe saying back then that Kendrick was not a top-tier lyricist by his standards when it came to punchlines and bars, while also calling Kendrick's overall lyrics good and his stories phenomenal. Then, All Hip Hop reported that in 2024, Lupe pushed back on the narrative that he had apologized to Kendrick specifically, saying he was sorry for the entire shindig because it was a waste of time and energy. And notice the pattern. He keeps insisting the issue is not fear, not hatred, not denial of Kendrick's greatness overall. It is the narrower technical category of lyricism as Lupe defines it. Again, you can think that definition is too rigid. I actually think that is where a lot of the audience disconnect starts. But what you cannot honestly say is that Lupe has been vague. This man has been annoyingly specific for years. The problem is that specificity is terrible for rage bait. Rage bait needs a villain, not a framework. Second cultural receipt. The so-called opposing camp has never behaved like this is some unforgivable blood feud in real life. XXL documented an earlier moment where Lupe's deleted "Lupe but" tweet about who was the better lyricist drew a simple LOL from Punch. Not a diss track, not a press release, not a "you crossed the line," just laughter. Hip Hop DX also noted that Lupe appeared on Ab Soul's Soul Burger, a project that included both Lupe and Punch among the featured memes. That matters more than 1,000 comment section verdicts. If Lupe can share space on a TDE-adjacent release, if Punch can publicly keep it light, if Lupe can repeatedly say TDE is one of his favorite rap labels, then what exactly are the fans fighting to the death over? This is why I keep saying the internet makes everything sound more apocalyptic than the artist's actual relationships do. Half the fan base is acting like a diplomatic crisis broke out, while the people involved are still moving around each other like grown men with long memories and functioning phones. Third cultural receipt. Lupe himself has tried multiple times to explain that people keep dragging Kendrick into the conversation, whether or not that was his plan. Billboard's 2024 report on Lupe's Twitter Spaces had him saying he was a Kendrick fan beyond the music, that he respected Kendrick's creativity, conceptualization, and impact for Black culture, and that he wished he had the kind of creative space TDE created, the kind of environment he felt he once had and no longer did. Complex's recent Culture United discussion also noted Lupe pushing back on the idea that he is bringing Kendrick up unprompted, saying he keeps being asked about him. Now, here's the nuance moment. A fair counterargument is that Lupe still chooses to answer, and sometimes he answers like a man who knows exactly how headlines work. That is true, but that does not erase the other true thing. Interviewers and live stream hosts absolutely know that saying Kendrick around Lupe is a content jackpot. So what do? They keep pressing the button. Then when Lupe gives them a technical answer, they package it like a personal attack. That is not journalism. That is a vending machine with a microphone. Fourth cultural receipt, and this is where the temperature really changes, comes from the company man's breakdown of the Culture United stream. According to that transcript, Punch's recent conversation with Lupe was tied directly to a 2010 clip where Punch said Lupe had fell off and was doing too many fairy tale raps, and Justin Hunt explained that Lupe had only seen that clip recently. Think about how insane that is. A buried old clip resurfaces, social media is already primed for combat, Lupe is on a multi-platform pressure run, and suddenly an ancient criticism acquires brand new emotional charge. That's how these stories mutate, not through one clean event, but through old footage colliding with fresh insecurity and a hungry algorithm. So if you came in here thinking this is a simple hero-villain fairy tale, ironic, I know, stay with me, because the culture layer is where the whole script flips. Here's the pattern interrupt. This stops being a rap debate the second you realize Lupe and Kendrick are not just two pens being judged in a vacuum. They're products of two radically different industry environments, and that difference shapes how every single public comparison feels. Billboard's 2024 piece quotes Lupe saying he wished he had the creative space TDE created, the kind of environment he felt he once had and no longer did. That is not a small confession. That is the kind of statement artists make when they're not only talking about music, but about infrastructure, label philosophy, team cohesion, release strategy, protection, and belief. Kendrick's rise was not just talent. Of course it was talent, but it was also system alignment.
TDE's curation, patience, myth-building, album architecture, and a brand strategy that consistently framed Kendrick as important without making him look desperate for importance. Lupe, by contrast, has spent huge parts of his career being discussed through friction, label drama, expectation wars, intellectual distance from the mainstream, and the constant burden of having to explain his own categories to people who already decided the headline before he spoke. That's why the comparison always feels hotter than it should. One man got a cathedral built around his gifts. The other often had to lecture people in the parking lot about what the cathedral was supposed to look like.
And the second structural angle is even uglier. Platform incentives are actively hostile to nuance. Lupe's recent run across live streams and podcasts happened in an era where every conversation is instantly mined for its most inflammatory 10 seconds. That means the system rewards absolutism, rewards contradiction, rewards he said what over here is the framework he used. How New Hip Hop framed the debate as being driven by stand wars and overreaction. Complex noted that Lupe had to address the same fixation narrative again during Culture Reunited. This is what the clip economy does. It turns definitions into offenses. It turns context into weakness. It turns a technical distinction, artist versus lyricist, battle rap versus commercial rap, punchlines versus storytelling, into a fake morality play. And the cruel joke is that the more verbal and layered you are, the easier you are to misframe. Lupe's strength becomes his vulnerability. He says too much, too precisely, with too many caveats, and the algorithm goes, perfect, let me remove all of those caveats and feed the loudest half sentence to the wolves. Then the wolves call it organic discourse. Nah, it is engineered outrage with better fonts. Now let's go one layer deeper, because this is where Lupe's own history makes the whole thing feel less like hatred and more like unresolved damage. In the Company Man transcript, Lupe described how fan actions around his Atlantic era, petitions, protests, and even the anonymous pressure campaign over lasers allegedly damaged his label relationship and contributed to a deal situation where the clock on his masters got reset. He said he had nothing to do with those actions, but still took the business consequences. That is a brutal insight, because it means Lupe has lived through a version of fandom where public energy did not simply support him, it also complicated his leverage. If you are an artist who has seen fan chaos bleed into label consequences, is it any surprise that you become hyper-aware of how discourse is weaponized? Is it any surprise that you might sound defensive, rigid, or over-explaining when your name gets dragged into another mass argument? Again, I want to be clear, this does not prove every Lupe take is correct. It does explain why his relationship to public narrative may be more damaged than people realize. The man is not just arguing bars, he is reacting to years of watching public interpretation alter private outcomes. And that is exactly why Kendrick's silence in all this lands so heavy, because silence only looks effortless when the machine around you is strong enough to make silence feel like power instead of absence. Billboard reported Kendrick winning Best Male Hip-Hop Artist at the 2026 BET Awards and taking Best Collaboration with Clips for Chains and Whips. Billboard also documented GNX setting a top rap albums record with 22 weeks at #1, and Luther setting a hot rap songs record with 27 weeks at #1. Earlier in the year, GNX returned to #1 on the Billboard 200 after the Super Bowl halftime show, and Kendrick became the first rap act with 3 albums in the top 10 of the Billboard 200 at the same time. That is what institutional dominance looks like. That is not just people like Kendrick. That is a whole ecosystem constantly validating the brand, the catalog, the mythology, the market position. So when Lupe speaks, he steps into a storm. When Kendrick says nothing, the storm still spells his name correctly. That is a systemic advantage, not just an artistic one. So here is the truth bomb, and this is the part a lot of people are not ready for. Punch didn't need to confront Lupe because Kendrick Lamar was in danger. He needed to clear the air because the conversation had drifted so far from the real issue that he was starting to rewrite everybody's motives in public. The real issue, to me, is not that Lupe secretly fears Kendrick or that Kendrick secretly needs protection. It is that Lupe keeps using Kendrick as the measuring stick for a category he thinks the culture misunderstands, while the internet keeps hearing that as a personal grudge because Kendrick has become too big to critique without people treating it like treason. That is why this whole saga feels cursed. One artist is speaking in taxonomy, the audience is hearing betrayal. One camp is saying lyricism, the other camp is hearing legacy. One man is trying to define the syllabus, the other man already owns the building. And the most damaging part for Lupe is that every time he enters the arena to clarify, the machine converts that clarification into fresh evidence against him.
That is devastating, not because he loses a rap battle that never happened, but because he keeps strengthening a narrative he claims he hates. The more he explains, the more the clip merchants smile. The more he insists he respects Kendrick, the more the algorithm hands out obsessed labels like Halloween candy. Meanwhile, Kendrick stays in the winner pose without even stepping on the mat. That is the payoff. This was never really a showdown over who can rap. It was an exposure of who benefits from the structure around the debate. Kendrick benefits from scale, silence, and a machine that turns absence into mystique. Lupe keeps getting taxed by transparency, context, and a media lane that monetizes his frustration while pretending to analyze it. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. This is not merely about bars. It's about positioning, infrastructure, and who gets to look calm while the internet makes the other guy look combustible. That is why at the end of all this, the right person is still winning. And yes, that person is Kendrick Lamar, but not for the lazy reason some fans think. He's not winning because Lupe Fiasco can't rap with him. Let's not get ridiculous. Lupe is still one of the most technically gifted MCs alive, and anybody pretending otherwise is just doing Stan cosplay with a Wi-Fi signal. Kendrick is winning because every major piece of this story ended up proving the same thing. He doesn't have to chase the debate for the debate to orbit him. Punch makes one call, one public statement, and the whole room resets. Lupe goes on multiple platforms trying to define terms, and the discourse still bends back towards Kendrick's gravity. That is not an accident. That is hierarchy. And there's another reason the resolution lands this way. Go back to two key moments. First, Lupe openly said Kendrick is the better artist with the better team, better production, better albums, better beat selection. Second, Billboard's reporting shows Kendrick is still stacking institutional wins in real time. Chart records, award wins, catalog dominance. Put those together and what do you get? You get the simplest, sharpest contrast in the whole story. Lupe may be arguing the exam, but Kendrick already owns the report card. That's the difference. One man is still trying to correct the rubric. The other man already collects honors in pen. And for the culture, the healthier takeaway is not Lupe is finished or never critique Kendrick. Nah, the healthier takeaway is that hip-hop has to relearn how to hear disagreement without instantly converting it into blood sport. Because if we can't do that, then the only thing that wins is the clip farm. And this is only the start, because the next development is obvious. Lupe has already signaled he may go ghost for a while, which means every future appearance, every interview, every stray lyric, every offhand answer about Kendrick, Nas, battle rap, or top-tier lyricists is now going to be treated like evidence in a case people never wanted to close. If he drops new music and stays focused, the entire story could pivot towards redemption through output. If he jumps back into another live debate, the pressure-run professor narrative comes roaring right back. Either way, the appetite for this conversation is not gone. It's just been temporarily sedated by Punch doing cleanup in public. So if you've been watching this whole mess thinking it was only about one call, trust me, it's bigger than that and it's not over. If you want more breakdowns like this, stay locked in, because the next video needs to be about the other side of this exact coin, the real reason Kendrick almost never responds directly when these rap world storms start around him, and how silence became the most dominant move in his entire playbook. That one has shock, receipts, and a payoff a lot of people are not going to enjoy, especially the folks who still think no response means no strategy.